Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's show. I'm your host, Zach Drew. You might notice some equipment sitting next to me. I'm starting a new show. It's been in the works for, my gosh, probably years. But we have really solidified and pulled the trigger on it. Nothing is going to happen to this show, the Zach Drew Show, IGBY International Ministries. You know, there have been times where we have started to get the ball rolling, but never before on this idea. And now's the time. Andrew Bellers and I spent, probably about 3 hours on Monday setting up a bunch of this equipment. There's a bunch of equipment that behind my desk that you can't see. And this new show is not going to be associated with the 501c3. It's going to be my own show. We're going to continue doing this one. But I'm trying to plan ahead for what I see happening in America. And a 501c3, it restricts the things I can say and can't say. And I don't want to be restricted in any way. I want to be able to be real, authentic, and say what is on my heart, my brain, my mind, what I feel the Lord is doing without repercussions from the government being shut down. And this is the avenue. And it is, and I want you to know, for those that I don't have anything, it's going to be 100% social media driven. We're not looking at cable time. It's going to be a very real show, very authentic. And quite frankly, it's probably not going to be a lot of people's cup of tea, because this show, while I'm going to be talking a great deal about the Lord, a great deal about politics, but it's going to be the authentic me, who I am. I love pop culture. I love video games. I love NBA. I might be ripping open some new packs of NBA while I'm talking about the Lord and what's happening at geopolitical events. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. This is going to be a show primarily focused for millennials and Gen Z. And so it's going to be called the Daily Bastion. And bastion has two definitions. It's a projecting part of a fortification built at an angle to the line of a wall so as to allow defensive fire in several directions. You imagine a castle and there's a fortifying section where you see, like in the movies, them throwing the arrows or a hole in or the gunfire, where you're able to take bullets from every direction, but it's a fortification along the city walls. It also is an institution, place, or person strongly defending or upholding particular principles, attitudes, or activities. And so it's going to be called the Daily Bastion with Zach Drew. It's going to be low budget. What we have seen, Gen Z and millennials don't care about how professional you are. It's going to be a one-camera shoot. It's going to be totally unedited. And it is going to be, and I'm going to be sharing about my life. Just things that I've went through that I've never even shared on the Zach Drew Show. It is going to be real and authentic, and I'm going to have I'm not going to be constrained in any way any longer. Like I said, it's not going to be a 501c3, so anybody who gets behind it, it's not going to be, we're crippling ourselves, the churches are, by not being able to get involved in even like political matters or endorse people or, because of the Johnson Amendment. They put a muzzle around the pulpits, totally defying precedent, so to speak, of what the church had established. And I don't want to be a part of that any longer. And so the Zach Drew Show is going to continue focusing, and it's going to be, as I continue with this other show, it's going to be more and more Bible-based, more Bible studies, going through the book of Revelation and so on and so forth. But the Daily Bastion is just going to be free reign to do whatever and say whatever I want. And I just feel like it's been brewing in me for years. And it's just going to be a good thing. So if you look up the Daily Bastion, we don't have any handles or anything yet. It's still going to probably take another 6 to 8 weeks to get everything rolling. But that's why I have the equipment. I didn't feel like putting it away because Honestly, I feel like if I put it away right now with all the things you can't see behind my desk, I'd screw it up. So I'm not going to take it out and put over in a other section of the studio. So spoiler alert, there's a new show coming. There's several different articles I want to talk about on today's program. It's not going to be a singular topic, but the first topic is this. Conservatives expect Johnson will embrace proof of citizenship voting in anti-shutdown measure. The article says hardline conservatives expect Speaker Mike Johnson will embrace their favorite tactic by bringing a stopgap bill to the House floor next week that includes a proof of citizenship voting bill and would extend government funding into 2025. Now, such a move, the article said, would not only grant a win to House GOP conservative wing, but also tee up a showdown with Democratic-controlled Senate and White House, with which both object to the voting bill. Congress faces a September 30th deadline to prevent a shutdown. So let's see here. So Jim Jordan took to X, once again, formerly Twitter, and he said, he says this, the SAVE Act would ensure that illegal aliens can't vote in our elections. Democrats oppose it. Why? And I see online the liberal rebuttal is because it is already illegal for them to vote. Okay, well, go ahead and put this meme on the screen. The SAVE Act prevents illegal immigrants from voting. Well, non-citizens already, can't vote, you stupid MAGA. Well, then you won't mind if we pass it then. No! Okay, right? Memes are awesome. We know why they oppose it. Like John Rich said, when you ponder, why would Americans in power purposefully try to destroy the USA? The answer is, as long as America is independent and strong, there can never be a global entity that calls the shots. One world currency, one world medicine, one world military is impossible as long as America stands. Topic number 2 for today's program. I talked about it last week about how Zuckerberg essentially said he was sorry for enforcing such draconian measures when it came to COVID, and also admitted to suppressing the Hunter Biden story before the election. And as I just kept thinking about it, it's just such a crazy thing for like this global elitist to come out and say that. It just doesn't make sense. And so some couple of theories, and I wanted to add in a very important one, a theory. So last week I did postulate a couple theories. One, it's Zuckerberg being honorable, and that he is saying this to try to say that he is being transparent. Don't believe it. Anyway, 2, maybe he is seeing that everyone is moving over to X and is trying to keep his company alive, and there may be a great deal of truth to that. Still, another one that I postulated, I think it could be something, but he's trying to get ahead of a whistleblower, and Zuckerberg obviously feels like he doesn't have the same type of globalist protection that is extending to those in our 3-letter agencies. But I thought about this week, and I thought, wow, think about this. Why would he do this? Why would Zuckerberg go against the deep state? If there is one single platform, and I think that nothing can compare to it. You could say X. You could say maybe like Google, but no, they don't have those type of analytics. If there was one single platform that could accurately gauge the election and how people are really feeling, it would be Facebook. Wouldn't be Rumble. It's all conservatives now. Couldn't be really X either. That pendulum has swung the other way. But Facebook. Could the Facebook back end analytics of Americans throughout, and even people throughout the world, but really I'll be talking about Americans here, could his back end analytics be telling him who's really ahead? And he's trying to get ahead of it because he knows he's going to have to deal with another Trump administration. I don't know. All right, the next story of the week is this, and this story is extremely alarming. This is what I've decided to kind of title the show after this week. So Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to President Trump, took to his X account, reposting a video of Kamala Harris from this week. The video was talking about court packing is on the ballot. The reporter, are you open to expanding the size of the Supreme Court? I am open to that discussion. Here's that quick little 3-second video.
Are you open to expanding the size of the Supreme Court?
I am open to that.
And then Stephen Miller wrote, under our system, the Supreme Court is the final word on what is and is not constitutional. If Harris wins, she will end the filibuster and pack the court, which will be the end of the First, Second, Fourth, Fifth, and Sixth Amendments as government is weaponized against political dissent. Once again, this is Stephen Miller, former senior advisor to President Trump. And I know it's kind of on the back burner of a lot of our big issues. My biggest issue will always be to save babies. And I don't like what I'm seeing, honestly, in either party with that. But I would say in the top 3, for sure, we'll be packing the court. And it's not in our forefront because, it's just like, well, if she gets in. But if she gets in, she will do that. And it will fundamentally forever, we will never be able to recover for that. There is about 2 or 3 issues that are on the table that we will never be able to recover from with this election. One is the one that I started out with, that granting amnesty to illegal aliens within this country, which total just over 20 million in this country, and just granting them complete amnesty. There is no recovery from that. From packing the courts, there is not going to be any recovery from that. They want to destroy what our founders created. They have the spirit of Antichrist upon them. They are establishing his kingdom throughout the earth. Do you not understand? They are the government our founding fathers warned us about, and more importantly, they are the government that the Word of God in the end of times warned us about. And the media is already preparing us for Kamala Harris to do away with the Constitution because it's dangerous. Just this week, I'm not pulling anything from even 10 days ago. Just this week, the dean of Berkeley Law, Dean Chemorenski, told MSNBC that it's time to ditch the U.S. Constitution. This is the dean of Berkeley Law. It's time to ditch the Constitution. Here is that video with also a little Alex Jones of InfoWars commenting behind it.
How, in your view, does the Constitution that this country was built on and has been for nearly 250 years is a threat, actually, to the country?
Choices that were made in adopting the Constitution have come to haunt us. The Electoral College increasingly is choosing the president who lost the popular vote. 2 senators per state.
Look at this
is undermining democracy.
Reading off a commie script.
Of Congress, there were 50 Democratic senators and 50 Republican senators.
This is a direct attack on the Republic.
Professor Chemorenski, I understand, this is Gene Robinson, I understand that there are lots of outdated pieces of the Constitution. There's also some really good stuff. I think it is probably true that the founders would be astonished that we haven't altered the Constitution to fit our present circumstances. On the other hand,
they've
though,
altered it a bunch.
In the real world, how wouldn't it be madness to try to change the Constitution at this point when the country is so polarized, so angry, and so unable to agree on anything? All those foundational principles, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, our freedoms, would be in jeopardy, it seems to me.
You're right. The country is deeply polarized, and that in itself is a threat to democracy. Our government has lost the confidence of the people.
Yeah, because you're a lying sack of crap.
In 1964, in a Pew
Yeah,
Research
we're awake
survey,
to you. It's not balkanized.
77% of the people
It's not
expressed confidence in
polarized. We
government.
hate you.
Last October,
We're winning.
it was 20%. In the book, I argue that much that's wrong with the government can be fixed by statute, but also be fixed by constitutional amendment. But I say, rather than a series of constitutional amendments, isn't it time to start thinking of a new constitution?
All right, so back to the Constitution. The media is priming the pump here, which they do. Liberal-owned, MSM media, mainstream media. Here it is again. Article from the New York Times this week. The Constitution is sacred. Is it also dangerous? It says in the article, born of compromise and contradiction. In 1787, when 55 delegates convened in Philadelphia to revise the Articles of Confederation, they ended up embarking on a project that was much bigger in scope. As Americans are taught in history class, the delegates drafted a new document establishing a national government consisting of three branches, legislative, judiciary, and executive, each functioning as a check on the others. The delegates were all white, and they were all men. But they nevertheless diverged on what they deemed to be an intractable issue, slavery. Though several states had already passed abolition statutes, nearly half the delegates were slaveholders. You hear what New York Times just said? Though several states had already passed abolition statutes, nearly half the delegates were slaveholders. The Constitution was thus born of compromise, with the enslavers getting the better end of the deal. So they're vilifying the writers of the Constitution to vilify the Constitution. To determine representation in the House and the Electoral College, the 3/5 compromise allowed slave states to count 3 of every 5 people held in bondage, none of whom, needless to say, could vote. And the Fugitive Slave Clause stipulated that even when enslaved people escaped to free states, they would never be free. I want you to know, I'm going to go into that. What the New York Times just said is not true. It's not. It's not. But I want to preface it by saying this is literally the greatest tool that I think anybody could ever have, is to be able to control the narrative through mass publications being newspapers and mass media being television news, right? And so let me ask you a question. Do you know when liberal media started? I think you can make a strong case that liberal media in America started in the 1920s. During that time, it was the Democrat Party that was founded in part by Martin Van Buren as a result of the Missouri Compromise. And did you know that the sole purpose of this political party was to promote their own agenda and propaganda, and one of their main goals was to avert a civil war? So the way they decided to go about this was by never talking about slavery. They simply didn't want to talk about it. Out of sight, out of mind. That was their goal. Okay? So this political party also offered a reward. People running for political office, promoting their party and agenda. You see, we had a political party that was simply trying to buy people out to promote this party's agenda. What did they do? They founded dozens and dozens and dozens of newspaper outlets across the United States. This has been their MO from the Genesis. These newspapers reported only on news for their candidates and political positions. Nothing was ever printed about opposing sides or views. Now it's more of an attack tactic. And it was completely biased news source. Most of you had no idea about this. But you see, something happened in the 1860s. It was the Civil War. People just got fed up with the news that they were receiving. They wanted to know where the generals were, and they wanted to know where the battles were being fought. They wanted to know, if their loved ones had died. The people were were so fed up and they started crying out for facts. Give us the facts, because the American people stood up and simply demanded for the true facts. That's what they got. Did you know that? From about 1865 to around 1955, our media became what it was originally created to be. And all news was reported giving both sides. You know, the directive of who, what, where, when, and why. It was followed. Until it wasn't anymore. And somewhere down the road, we once again became jaded. And the majority of our news outlets are all once again reporting their agenda. It's the mainstream news. But you can see it. I can see it. You can feel it. I believe, many of us can feel it. That history is starting to repeat itself again. I think we're literally on the wave of experiencing another revolution as they did in the 1860s. This is the reason, I think, for the explosion of other platforms, primarily being X and their unbelievable success. But everything that New York Times article said, it's like this pseudo history. And this is what they shoved down our children's throats in public school. This is from Wall Builders. Let me read this to you. Even though the issue of slavery is often raised as a discrediting charge against the Founding Fathers, the historical fact is that slavery was not the product of, nor was it an evil introduced by the Founding Fathers. Slavery had been introduced to America nearly 2 centuries before the founders. The War of Independence was the turning point in the national attitude, and it was the Founding Fathers who contributed greatly to that change. In fact, many of the founders vigorously complained against the fact that Great Britain had forcefully imposed upon the colonies the evil of slavery. Many of the Founding Fathers who had owned slaves as British citizens released them in the years following America's separation from Great Britain, being George Washington, John Dickinson, Caesar Rodney, William Livingston, George Wythe, John Randolph. Furthermore, many of the founders had never owned any slaves. For example, John Adams proclaimed, "My opinion against slavery as it has always been known. Never in my life did I own a slave." Other prominent Founding Fathers who were members of societies for ending slavery included Richard Bassett, James Madison, James Monroe, Bushrod Washington, Charles Carroll, William Few, John Marshall, Richard Stockton, Zephaniah Swift, and many, many others. In fact, based in part on the efforts of these founders, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts began abolishing slavery in 1780. Connecticut and Rhode Island did so in 1784, Vermont in 1786, New Hampshire in 1792, New York in 1799, and New Jersey did so in 1804. Additionally, the reason that Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan, Wisconsin, Iowa all prohibited slavery was a congressional act authored by Constitution signer Rufus King and signed into law by President George Washington, which prohibited slavery in those territories. It is not surprising that Washington would sign such a law, for it was he who had declared this: "I can only say that there is not a man living who wishes more sincerely than I do to see a plan adopted for the abolition of it," being slavery. The truth is that the Founding Fathers, who were responsible for planting and nurturing the first seeds for the recognition of Black equality and for the eventual end of slavery, this was a fact made by Richard Allen, was the Founding Fathers. It was the Founding Fathers. Well, wait a second, Zach. Wait a second. I thought that the Republicans were the bad guys. Liberal media has changed. It's so sick. It's so twisted. It's so evil. And not just media, but it's our universities, our sciences, our arts. It's a sickness. My gosh, I am out of time. I need to figure out how to also, in my new program, there'll be no time restraints. If I talk for 5 minutes and I'm done, it's done. If I have long wave form and it's 3 hours long, it's 3 hours long. It's going to be called the Daily Bastion. And I'm going to be launching it here in just the next, probably, I don't know. We're getting close, probably 6 to 8 weeks. Hopefully it's sooner than that. I'm out of time for today. I'm sorry, guys. So I'm just going to read this last 2-minute thing that I thought was very, very valuable. And I'm not even going to provide a great deal of commentary on it because I think it speaks for itself. And then I got to sign off and see you next week. I thought the Republicans were the bad guys. I want to read this from, and let's go ahead and put this on the screen, Andrew. This is from Mr. Dinesh D'Souza. Many of you know him. He's so awesome. He's created such incredible documentaries. He says this: every segregation law in the United States from the 1880s to the 1950s was passed by a Democratic legislature, signed by a Democratic governor, enforced by Democratic officials, and there is not a single exception to this rule. Inevitably, when I tell students this, the following happens. Some professor stands up and says, Mr. D'Souza, you are misleading the audience by pointing a finger of blame solely at one party, whereas we all know that there was plenty of blame to go around. And he says this. That's a very interesting statement. First of all, it retreats from the position that the Republicans are the bad guys. It now tries sort of with a squid-like cloud of obfuscation to spread the blame so broadly so that no one really knows what's going on. So it really is important at this time to unfurl what I call the crushing fact. It is the fact that settles the argument at one blow. This is the time for me to point out that in 1860, the year before the Civil War, no Republican owned a slave. Think about it for a moment. I'm not saying that no Republican leader owned a slave. I'm not saying no Republican in the United States owned a slave. All you have to do is name one Republican who owned a slave, and I would have to take this back. And yet, from the time I made this statement well over 2 years ago, not a single valid counterexample has surfaced. Several months ago, I did get an email from a demographer at the University of Michigan who said, well, Dinesh, I've been working this. I've got you right here. Ulysses S. Grant inherited a slave on his wife's side. I said, well, that is, and that's basically saying it's true. But, I need to point out to you that at the time this occurred, Ulysses S. Grant was a Democrat. He became a Republican later. What am I getting at? We have a really strange phenomenon that if you look at what's going on now, you have Democrats on the left pointing the finger of racism at the very people who fought racism from the beginning of this country's history while suppressing the fact that the actual racism came from their party. This is not just about slavery. The Democrats were the party of slavery, of segregation, of founding the Ku Klux Klan, of reviving the Ku Klux Klan, of racial terrorism, and opposition to the Civil Rights Movement of the 1960s. The opposition to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, the Fair Housing Bill of 1968 came mainly from the Democrat Party, and that's a fact. Oh my gosh, he just keeps going. I want to address one final point. This is a very important point for the left. It is the idea that the two parties switch sides. The main thrust of the argument is that racist Dixiecrats, those who voted against the Civil Rights Act, all became Republicans. I've heard this argument too. If true, this would vindicate the idea that the Democrats have once been the bad guys, but now the bad guys have sort of, moved over. The beauty of this kind of statement is the fact that it is empirical. It's not one of those, who's to say what's true. No, all you have to do is a web search for Dixiecrat, and then you count how many of the racist Dixiecrats became Republican. The correct answer, which I will let you know, is 2. In the House, one guy, Albert Watson, and the Senate, one guy, Strom Thurmond. And all the other racist Dixiecrats lived and died in the Democratic Party. They are lionized to this day. They are buildings in Washington, D.C. named after them, so this notion of a party switch is a big lie. The racists stayed in the Democratic Party. Their tactics shifted over the years. What does this leave us today? Very sadly, some of these terrible things from history. Bigotry, a fascist streak, we still have it in America. But where is it coming from? People say Trump's the fascist. He hates democracy. He won't tolerate dissent. I'm thinking if Trump's a fascist and he won't tolerate dissent, how come you are dissenting? Trump is bashed on every platform every minute of the day. He's bashed on the Emmys. Broadway shows are interrupted to bash Trump. If this was Mussolini, he would send a bunch of goons and beat those guys up, and that would be the end of that. That's how dictators actually behave. I saw Cher complaining that Trump beat her up on Twitter. On Twitter, that's being said. There's a streak of bullying, intimidation, and intolerance. I would argue that simple empirical evidence shows that it is coming from the left. Well, I am once again out of time. These are what I considered the biggest news stories of the week. Tune in next week to find out what is going on in the world. I'll see you then.